Hello and welcome to the programme. Now, in the past years, the Ukrainian book market has increased its business activity and demonstrated its quality. Now, as a result of the cultural and political situation that emerged after Russia's aggression, Ukrainian publishers and book traders have been trying to contribute more actively in the formation of Ukraine's own market. Now, pleased to say, to talk more about the perspectives of Ukrainian publishing businesses, we are joined in the studio today by Kateryna Mishchenko, an editor and writer. Hello, thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So this is such an interesting topic, but before we talk about that, can you tell me a bit about Meduza itself, this project you're involved with, and how you got involved?
Meduza is an independent publishing project, I would say. We are maybe not so big to be called a house. And we are organized researchers, cultural scientists, translators who want to bring some interesting, fresh intellectual texts from different language in Ukrainian context. And we were organized in 2013, and since then we are publishing mostly translations of non-fiction, but we have also a couple of anthologies and artistic publications as well.
And you have a couple of books in front of you as well that we can show. So you said this is non-fiction,
like
and you're involved in this. How did you get involved?
Yeah, I'm an editor and one of the co-founders of Meduza, and here I am an editor. It means I collected the text and worked with authors.
Yeah, and it must have been incredibly interesting for you as well, because when you're editing these texts, perhaps you find out a lot of information about Ukraine and the guide there you have to Kiev that you didn't even know about yourself. Is that right?
Yes, you know, it's. I think that the editor's work is something like curating today, especially by these books, because I want to thematize some things. I'm involved in the building of the discourse in contemporary Ukraine, and I think it's really interesting. And I was happy to work with the Kiev Biennial project. That's why I also had the possibility to work with international designers in this book, also with international authors, so I can really shape the cultural landscape in Ukraine. Yeah, and it makes me really inspired. Yeah,
and tell people the different stories. What is the difference between sort of the more independent publishing houses or projects like the one that you have, and perhaps the bigger ones that are perhaps more well known? What are the advantages and disadvantages of that?
Yeah, I think the advantage of the big houses is the possibility to make books in big print runs, to have a good coverage in the country. So maybe they have also means to make some, I would say, not so popular books, but which could be really important for the local context. And we make only these important books, but because of this lack of means and of people, we cannot be so productive as some big houses. And we are not dependent in our choice whom to translate, whom to represent.
So you have more of a choice in that respect. But what about funding as well, for example?
And we are not commercially oriented. So we really first have a look what is missing in, for example, Ukrainian humanities, was not translated. What is also important, we try to translate the texts or the books into Ukrainian which were not translated into Russian. Because I know that in Ukrainian humanities there are many good Russian translators and the scientists are using them. So we try to be really exclusive and new, and in this way we want to broaden this context of translated books. And what was your question again?
And really it was about the commercial aspect. But
commercial. We are mostly working with embassies or institutions like Goethe Institute or political foundations. It depends on the topic, on the author, on the context, and then we get some funding, mostly for the translation.
Yeah.
So we always have our contribution in printing or in graphic design, but the translation, I should say, it is the most...
I can imagine this is one of the most difficult tasks as well. It must be quite daunting when you see the book for the first time.
It's a very difficult and huge work, actually, and it should be paid.
Yes.
And what is also important for Medusa is to pay everybody good. And I am originally a translator of German literature, and I was involved in some initiatives which were trying to thematize the role of the translator and also the economic situation of the translators community in Ukraine. That is why I know that it is a difficult work and it should be good paid, and that is why we are forced to look for foundations for some fundings because
they're expensive.
Each book project is quite expensive.
And also in Ukraine, I've been to a couple of these book fairs myself, and they're always incredibly impressive. There's one in Kiev at the Arsenal, and also another one in Lviv. And the one in Lviv, you could spend probably 1 or 2 days just looking around. It's sprawled over this huge complex. So that's just a couple of examples, but can you describe a bit more about how the Ukrainian market has developed since 2014, where the areas where it's grown and perhaps where the areas where it still needs to improve?
I think what is really remarkable is the appearance of these smaller projects, of independent initiatives, and each of them has its own vision, what should be translated. It could be literature or some interesting historical publications, non-fiction. And what is maybe more important is the initiative of the readers and the interest. I remember the book Arsenal in Kiev in 2014. Masses of people, everybody wants to discuss, to talk with each other, to reflect all the events. I think it was really unforgettable experience for me as a publisher, and I was also so enthusiastic and wanted to publish books which could be discussed, which could be inspiring for the readers.
Because it's such a reward for yourself when people are discussing this.
I think it is the most important thing of our book market, because actually I should say for our country and for these 40 million of people we have here, our book market is quite tiny. It's really small. In comparison to our neighbors like Poland, it is quite small and we should work on it. And
but you have to start somewhere, though, and it's positive. I mean, how difficult is it for independent publishers, perhaps in Ukraine, you might have some examples, to build links with publishers in other countries or editors or translators in other countries to cooperate? Is it quite difficult to reach out if you're quite new in the market?
I think yes. The most challenging task, I think, is the networking with the translators. I was lucky because of my interdisciplinary approach in my work. I also work as a curator, and again, my partnership with the Kyiv Biennial was a good possibility to find interesting translators into English. And it is even more important, I think, for Ukraine today to find good translators from Ukrainian in foreign languages. Like
what about the
German
distribution as well? Because that must be quite difficult, because they always say that, 30% of all business projects should be marketing and selling your product. So that must be quite difficult.
Medusa is really small, but our distribution network is not much different from some big publishing houses in Ukraine, because we have a couple of
a couple of like different
like not networks, but this
like working operations or systems or something like this?
I mean this bunch of bookstores.
Oh, okay, like a chain, like a
we have a couple of chains of bookstores and some separate bookstores, for example, in Kiev or in other bigger cities, and that is why it is not so complicated to build up such a network for distribution, but it is still really small, and it is and this is really our problem, that we cannot publish like thousands of books, not because our readers are not probably interested, but because we just have no spaces and places to give it to offer it. And it is the most challenging factor or thing in our work, and unfortunately we cannot solve it by ourselves. We need our wonderful Ukrainian state, and we need some maybe solidarity of the publishers, and not only publishers, also other players of a book market, and we should solve it somehow together.
So we spoke about the publishers and also the language issue, but what about authors as well? I mean, over the past couple of years, have you seen any sort of trend that there are more Ukrainian authors who are bringing out or trying to bring out works? I know the sort of copies that come across your desk, are they becoming more and more frequent, or has it stayed the same?
We are asked from time to time, but Medusa is specialized on translations, and we are working actually with prominent scholars or authors from abroad. But I had ideas to bring some Ukrainian names Are
there any examples that you could give, perhaps, of Ukrainian authors who have been quite successful in publishing their materials, like perhaps people you know, or that sort of thing?
Who was successful? I think we all know these names. We have not so many really famous people like I don't know, Sergei Zhadan, Tanya Malyarchuk, Andruchovich, Zabushko are known. We all know them, and
But still, these names are growing over time, and it takes time to get your name out there.
It could be more. I would say it could be more. And what could also be, and I think it is also in growing, is essayistic and some other types of texts which are not really fictions. But something maybe on the edge or...
Okay. And I have one final question for you before we leave. How do you predict the future trends are going to look like in terms of this Ukrainian publishing market? Do you see it growing in the future steadily, or...?
You know, now I can only hope and have some visions, but I don't know if I have some visible trends for it. I hope that it will grow. I hope that our new institutions like this Ukrainian Book Institute or also Ukrainian Cultural Foundation will support somehow, but I would repeat it again, it is more important to have some structural changes of our book market, to have a good access to libraries, to involve libraries or to empower them to buy new books which appear and which are important, to communicate with universities, and we need the support of the state institutions in this question.
Oh, perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming into our studio, and best of luck with all your work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was Kateryna Mishchenko, an editor and writer. Thank you for watching UATV, and stay tuned for more.